Hello, everyone. This is BT's on the Fly, and we got a fly tying Friday. Today, the presentation is on the poly humpy and a surprise pattern. Both of these flies are straight from our personal fly boxes, and I want to show you a little something about that. This is my personal fly box, and it's been with me all the years I was a working guide, and it's got multi-compartment boxes like these with flies in them. This box right here is poly humpies.
Oh,
You want to
man.
hold that, Gretchen, so I don't. And I'll just pop it open so you can get an idea of what a bunch of poly humpies look like.
Oh, wow.
So I use the poly humpy a little bit. Tonight's flies are two of the ones straight out of our personal fly boxes that we fish with. You know, we've made a good portion of our living tying hairwing flies over the years for fly shops. And but we fish with the poly versions of most of those hair wings, and you'll find them if you don't have the recipe for this fly, you'll find it in our book, um, the Humpy Encyclopedia. Yes, you can buy it from Amazon for 20 bucks, give or take, or from us for the same amount, but it's also free if you'll go to our website right up there in the wherever the heck, get my finger there, up there in the screen. Hey, I gotta be careful, or somebody's gonna think the wrong stuff here, aren't they? Anyway, right up there on the left of the screen is btsflyfishing.com. That'll take you into the home page. Right hand side, second book down is the Humpy Encyclopedia. And there's a link there to download a free version, which is a PDF copy, which is the exact copy that you would get if you bought the print version. Of course, you're going to have to use a computer to look at the PDF file. But anyway, tonight we're going to be tying the poly humpy, and let's start by looking at the materials that we'll be working with. Obviously, this big old skein right here is poly yarn. I'm just going to set that aside. In fact, what I'm going to do is real quick while I'm at it, is just cut off a chunk and put it over by my tying vise, and then get this big old skein out of the way. We'll talk more about that here in just a minute. Put that over there. The second fly will need peacock, so for right now, I'll set that aside, as well as the copper wire. I'll set that aside as well. Static guard. This is a must for anybody that ties with hair. We've talked about it many times, but if you haven't heard this before, awful lot of people tell me that they have trouble with their flies stacking the hair. It sticks to things. It won't come out even. They've got bad hair. They don't have bad hair. They need to use static guard. And I'm just going to spray down everything right now.
I've got some downstairs.
Onto my hands. Put that away. Now, if the smell of the static guard is a problem for you, what you want to do is get some of the Bounce electric dryer pads for drying your clothes. And that's also for taking static electricity out, and they work really well. Now I've got two colors of thread. I've got a floss, single strand floss first off, and then same color of thread. I'll just set those over by my vise. We'll be using those here in a moment. Okay, hooks, obviously, I'll set that aside. And we got dry fly hackle. I'll set that over by the vise as well. And moose body hair. I want you to notice how I take my scissor points and reach down to get my hair. I don't pull it up like this and try to shove in and cut it or anything like that. I lift up what I need, grab a hold of the piece of hair, and then shove my scissors as tight against the hide as I can get it to cut it off. What I don't want to have happen is have all this stubble gradually get longer as I cut my way up the piece of hair. Okay, now I'm going to grab this by the tips, and there's a lot of fuzz and crap in this end right here that I need to get rid of. And I usually run my finger up and down like this. Now I'll get out my hair stacker. This hair stacker is my old buddy, made out of a shotgun shell, a copper nipple, and a chapstick tube. I've had this one and 23 others just like it for 40 years, and I know I sell some really beautiful brass ones And I don't use them. This is what I use. Just love them. I want you to notice something right here, that I'm hanging, the thread is hanging right in the middle. And the reason that I don't take it closer to the wing placement point on the shank is because the bulk of the hair will cause what I call material creep. And I'll show you here in just a minute what material creep is. But for right now, I'll get my stacked hair out of the stacker, set the stacker over out of the way. And I'm going to try to identify what I want for the volume of hair in the tail. Well, there's several ways to do that. And the easiest one to show in a Zoom presentation is the one I'm going to illustrate for you right now. These two fingers in the left hand, I pinch it together from this direction, and I can hold that bundle of hair. Now I'm going to come from the other direction and pinch that bundle together. What I'm doing is gathering the hair into a bundle and then press as tight as I can. And the bundle should be no thicker than about half the gap of the hook. And that's just about what I want right there. I've got one white one that I don't want in the tail, so let me find that and get rid of it. I'll verify that it's good. Yep. Tail of the length of the tail is equal to the hook shank. I'll move it into position, and I'm going to tilt the hair on my side of the hook. Take a loose turn, a second loose turn, and then apply pressure and roll it up on top. And then continue wrapping over that as I bind it in place. I use tight anchor wraps where I tied it in, and snug and tight anchor, holding in anchor wraps to position it in place and keep it in place. Now here's what I want you to notice. You'd think that cut off hair, when I get through with it, would end up at the center of the hook. Well, in fact, because of its bulk, no matter how close I cut it, it creeps forward just a little bit. Let me see if I can get you a better look at that. You see how that it's snuck forward? I'll call it a thread turn or two thread turns. Let's just back away from that. That's an important consideration when working with the stuff that we're going to be working with, because it doesn't have a lot of forgiveness to it. And we're going to want the wings to be positioned right about the 1/3 point. And darn, we want to make sure that we don't position this wrong. What's the best way? Position it incorrectly so that the material creep causes us to sneak forward on the hook and leaves us in a situation where we have no room left for the hackle when it's time to put the hackle on. Okay, so the way we're going to tie this on now, it takes a double bundle, if you will, to make a humpy in a size 10, which is what I'm tying right now. Now, if I tie that all on like this, I want you to see that then if I pull that over, I have a really steep cliff right here, I'm going to call it. And it's going to leave a spot on the underside of the hook that the hackle won't even cover. So what we have to do is to accommodate that, the bulky non-compressing poly yarn, is to tie it on in stages. So let me back up here, and I'll tie this one on sort of in the middle of the body area. Okay, now I'm going to tie on the second one slightly forward of that, kind of stair-stepping it, if you will. Okay, now you can see that how we've kind of stair-stepped that. Now let me pull these, one off to one side, one off to the other side, and let me bind my body in place. See how I'm kind of spreading the two apart? What I'm doing is setting myself up for wing placement as I advance the fly forward on the hook. All right, that's looking pretty good. All right, now we want the wing to set right there at the 1/3 place. That's where we typically want our wings. But because of the bulk, the unforgiving bulk, if you will, of the poly, it's going to slip forward on me. So I'm going to back up about 2 turns and then pull this over and get ready to bind it in place. Now here's a fact of whenever you're tying a humpy, I don't care whether it's with poly yarn or with any kind of animal hair, it's impossible to pull the hump tight. Or you cannot, I'll take and reset this, pull it just as tight as I can, and you'll get it to where it's pretty good. I'm pulling as hard as I can on that, and you'll get it fairly close. But you have to press the hump tight. You pull it forward, and then you press right here at the back where I'm pressing with my trigger finger of my left hand, and I dress forward. Take my thumb of the left hand, dress forward on the near side. I want you to see how that tightens up right there, where if I try to pull it, it'll always be slightly loose. Now I'll tighten that up. All right. Now I'm just going to wrap a thread dam in front to stand up my wings. Yeah, I'm going to. All right, and I'm just going to cut these off more or less to the length that I want them. I'll trim them after I get the hackle, but for right now, I'll just cut them off a little bit long, set that aside, and we'll switch now from floss to the 6/0 thread. So I'm going to go ahead now and switch threads, or switch from floss to thread, if you will. Set that aside. So rotate the jaws all the way around if you want. Well, I don't want to go all the way around. I just want to turn them so I can get a look at the wings, so I can crisscross between the wings and wrap around each post. There we go. Now I'm going to wrap around each wing post, helping separate it and also help stand that up straight. For the person that was asking about standing it up straight, you're going to see here in a minute how I do that. Notice how I'm wrapping up that, there we go. Excuse me, how I'm wrapping up that wing post. Now, I'm getting a ways up that post now. I am going to go backwards to the body and around it. And what I've done is I've come from the top of that post right straight to the ground. It's kind of like a tent stake and the guiding rope that takes it to the ground. We'll do the same thing over here on the other side, and we'll just tent rope it here real quick. Let's see if I can get that there. That, I think that shows pretty good. Does that show pretty good, Rich?
Really good.
Okay, good. Okay, now this one is, I don't have to do it all backwards, so it'll be a little easier. I want you to see that I'm coming from my rope is tied to the top of the tent stake. It's now anchored to the ground, and I have to wrap backwards to do that. And what that does, though, is makes both of those very divided and stand up straight. That's called posting the wing. Now I got some crazies here that don't want to get with the program, and that's why God gives you scissors, is to get rid of the ones that don't want to get with the program. All right. Now I'll push those up a little bit. You see how I was wrapping backwards when I got to this point like that. I was counter wrapping. Now I need to get going the right direction, and all I do is use that wing post to help me turn around and go in the proper direction. Now I think I'll trim these wings just a little bit. That's looking pretty good. And one of the things about the wing, we want the wing to be equal in length to the shank of the hook. Well, here's a hook for the next fly, and I set that in place and checked my measurement, and yep, she's right in line there. So this is good to go. Now it's time for the hackle. I've been waiting for a place to get rid of this piece of hackle. I've had it for a while, and I just never could find a real good place for it. Now the problem with this feather is it's brown in some spots, black in other spots. I don't know what the heck it is in some of those spots. But this is a good place to get rid of it because the fly that I'm tying is a foundation fly, meaning we're showing you the general design. You pick the colors and size that fit your fishing needs. And it may be red, or if you're fishing in Idaho like me and you're headed up for the Locksaw, Patty Badham, um, or a couple of you others from Boise, then a green humpy, a lime, actually a lime is really to die for. It's a really good pattern. Now, I was tying this for a customer and the phone rang. Again, this was back in the days when we talked on phones. And he said, "Oh, Al, I forgot to tell you, I want you to heavily hackle those. I want them to really float high." I said, well, "Okay, no problem. And here's how we're going to heavily hackle it with one feather. I'll just start with the first turn tight against the hump, if you will. Let me turn that so you can see just right there, right against the hump. And one more turn right up tight against the back of the wings. But I left a gap there. That's okay. We'll worry about that later. The next one is going to be tight in front of the wings. And then I'm going to open up the turns a little bit in a palmer wrap until I get almost to the front. And then I'm going to turn around and go back in the way direction I just came, filling in some of those gaps. Okay. And now we'll get back here to the first turn behind. Another turn. I want you to notice how I'm allowing though that feather to twist. That helps me lay the fibers exactly where I want them. And if they start laying the way I don't want, then I'll let some of the twists out. And now we're getting ready to come up to the front. Now here's a trick I'm going to share with you all that comes from John Kareff, who is on tonight's call. And that is, I'm being very careful to separate the fibers at my tie-off point so that I don't bind any of the fibers down. John calls it separating the fibers. I think you can probably see what I'm doing. Let me turn it here. What that does is keep me from binding fibers down, and it also keeps stray fibers going in all kinds of directions you hadn't planned on. Now I'm up to this point here. I've got a pretty good looking fly, and it would be really easy to screw this fly up. And how do you screw it up? Well, you say to yourself, darn, that's a good looking fly, but I sure don't want it to come apart. I better put some more turns of thread on there so the feather doesn't come out. And you put turn number 3 on, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 16, 18, 20. Well, that'll hold it. Oh, I got to cut the feather off. So you cut the feather off, and you say, oh, darn, I got to cover the feather up too. And so you do, and you end up with a good looking fly and a big lopsided head. Let me back up here. Right there. Okay, that's 2 turns that I originally started with. Now we're going to talk about what we call dog legging the hackle and wrapping a jam knot for the head instead of the traditional knot where you tie it off, cut it off, and then try to cover up the waist end. I got to tell you that I'm an evaluator for the FFI Bronze, Silver, and Gold Awards program. The one thing that causes more lost points for people is poorly done heads. And I'm going to share with you the trick that will get you 100% score for the head on every fly if you follow along with the way we describe it. Now, to dog leg it, I've got two turns holding it. What I'm going to do now is pull all fibers and the feather back and wrap several turns of thread in front. Each turn, the first one starts right at the hook eye, and then each subsequent turn goes further back on the hook as I build this jam knot. And then I'll do it one more time. One of the things that I don't like about this new high definition is you guys can see my mistakes too darn easy. This is not good. I think I probably better get rid of it. No, we're not going to do that. But what we are going to do now is we're up to the point where we're at a critical point in tying our fly. And I notice where in building my jam, my dog leg and jam knot, that my thread ended up at the back of the eye area, exactly where I want it to be for a good whip finish. Not a whip finish that's going to come apart on me. So I'm just going to go ahead now and start my turns. First one is at the back of the head area, and then advancing forward, 3, 4, and I'll trim off the thread, and I'll trim off the feather. Set that aside, and let me check and just see whether I like those wings. Those wings need to be trimmed just a little bit shorter. And there we've got a completed humpy. I am going to go ahead and start in the center of the hook again. And just put on my underbody of red. Imagine though, if you will, that it's lime green. Oh, well, let me back up. Oh, I needed to do something and I forgot. One of the things that I need to do is take some copper wire, and it's not imperative that you use a rib of copper, but I'm going to because I want to strengthen the peacock that we're going to use for the front part of the body. All right, I'll just pull this over, pull it back out of my way, stick it to my material keeper. All right. Now, let me make sure that I didn't get back up one little bit. I want you to notice that I didn't let the thread come all the way back to my starting point. Let me zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. You see how the thread is hanging just shy of my starting point? Well, you see, I want the waist from the tail to land straight on that starting point. So I am going to tie it on slightly back. Okay, now I'm going to trim off the tail. And I want you to notice something. When we talked about that little spot, let me zoom in. Notice that those trim ends land right smack on that line that I had with the start of my thread. And that's exactly where I want it. Let me back up again now. Get my rib out of the way. Now I'm going to wrap this forward just a bit and switch to my 6/0 thread. And I'll just trim off the floss, get it out of the way. I want you to notice that the peacock is twisting as I wrap. As long as I hold it in place, it twists, making kind of a peacock chenille as I wrap forward. And now I'm going to wrap back over that same body and tie it off right at the front there. Of my copper wire. Okay, I normally use white, but we're now not exactly following the recipe, so it's going to be gray because guess what I have laying here at the desk? Gray. And I'd have to go looking for white. And all we're doing right now is showing you how to tie the fly. You put the colors in there that you want. Now you see I've got them tied in separate spots. Let's see if I can pull them apart a little bit better so you can see better. There they are. Okay, so now I'm going to wrap back over and build my hackle ramp, my hackle platform, whatever you want to call it. Okay, there we go. And I think I'll just cut it to length. I want the wing to be about, so it ends just about in the middle of the tail. And move forward just a tiny bit. There we go. Let me try that new comb. Okay, now I want you to notice that I'm leaving the thread hanging at the back. And that's because I'm going to wrap forward, just like I did before, and I'm leaving spaces. As I work my way forward, and I'm going to come back again going the other way, filling in those gaps, and the crisscross wraps that I'm producing with the feather stems over each other strengthens the fly, and you'll see why here in just a minute, because I'm going to advance the thread and the feather together with the thread behind. And what happens when you do that, I'm going to rotate the vise to do that, and when you do that, when the thread is behind the feather, it anchors the feather with each turn. One turn of hackle is the same as placing in another turn in behind it and anchors it in place. So what I'm doing is adding a crisscross wrap through all of my hackle, plus anchoring the hackle that I'm wrapping forward right now. And I can do that by hand, or I can use the rotating vise to do it, either or. And as John Kreff says, you divide the fibers so that you're not tying any fibers down there at the front. Okay. Now, and I lost it there, so I am going to back up and let it come loose. Doesn't look quite right because I lost it when I wasn't watching what I was doing. But I want you to notice it doesn't come unwrapped. That's because it was anchored in place by the thread that was following it. Yeah, it's pretty well dressed. You know what? It's too well dressed. Let me just back up.
Yeah, it's a little high.
It's hackled too heavy. So, well, you can change in midstream the way we did this one. We'll trim this feather off at the back. And I'm going to rib forward through that with wiggle turns. And guess what I'm doing? I am further strengthening that hackle. It's not totally bulletproof, but darn near it. And now we don't have to dogleg anything. And I'm going to show you another way to whip finish a fly with a half hitch tool. We do this a lot. We'll start with a half hitch. Second half hitch. Now here, I'm going to get ready to do a whip finish, and here's a mistake. I want you to notice how I wrapped over the top of that. And that's a mistake. What you want to do if you're going to do this kind of a whip finish is it's 1, 2, 3, slip it into place, and you just whip finish the fly.